Software. Today we're going to be talking about the death of data without context with a specific kind of focus on historical data. So thank you, Jeff and Dylan, for taking the time to join this live stream. If you guys are joining this live stream or watching the recording after, let us know where you're joining from and ask any questions. You feel free to ask them during the live stream. We want to collect all of these and answer any questions you may have. We have a little bit of an agenda today. Um, but we're going to be talking about the problem of why data with context even exists in the first place. I know me personally as a system integrator, about 10 years ago, I was working on a project where I was doing a startup on a continuous process. And without historical data, we couldn't actually do our job. So, and back then, for like a 500 tag count historian, I won't mention the name, but it was about $8,000, right? So that was $8,000 out of pocket just to be able to complete the startup because we lacked data with context in order to actually not only improve the process, but even start it up in the first place. So that's me. I'm Zach Scriven. I have a background in SCADA, automation, and now I'm the digital marketing manager of Abelara. I'm going to kick it over to Dylan. Dylan, welcome.
Hey, yeah. So talking about data and context today. If you've been watching any of the series, co-founder of Abelara, hosted a lot of different people before ProveIt here for a lot of different topics. So today we've got Jeff here with Flow Software, and when we're starting to talk about context and data, there's no one better I know to bring in and really hear about how they solve that and why and how they build that foundation. So yeah, Jeff, you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, hey everybody. Zach Dillon, thanks for having me. You need a bigger list of people that you know then, if I'm the best you've got. For those that don't know me, my background in this industry was time series data, working with the great men and women over at Canary Labs. And about 4 years ago, became a partner at Flow Software, specifically because of my experience focused on time series data, and really excited to be here today and share my learnings from about now, I guess, 12 or 13 years of this space.
Yeah, so I guess if we just want to kind of kick it off here. I know Zach, you had an agenda, so you want to kind of go over the agenda, see where we're going, let everybody know what's coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we were starting with what's are the problem, why do we need data with context, and what are the problems we're going to be solving, and why do we need it? We've got the foundation. So what does it actually mean to start with context and really have that context, and what is historical data? How does that enable it? We're going to talk about how and where things break. So common failure modes. Are you even collecting the data? Are you storing it? Are you storing too much, or are you storing it in ways that make it hard to use later? And then there's various supporting architectures, unified namespace, unified analytics frameworks, and various other microservice architectures that you can use to enable this at scale. With a specific emphasis on the unified analytics framework, bringing in Flow Software and Jeff here. And then various ways of making it practical, solving some of those failure modes, and what can you actually do to get started with other platforms and tools, also from Flow Software and others like Timebase. Various paths forward, and then just kind of an open-ended discussion, see where things go. So I think I'll kick it off to you, Jeff. When it comes to the story of data and context, all right, maybe there's more people for the actual data side of it, but you're one of the best storytellers in this space, that's for sure.
Data and context. Yeah, thanks. Uncontextualized data is absolutely meaningless. And so, luckily, even in our space, what we might consider uncontextualized data usually actually has context. Uncontextualized data would be you seeing blue, a string value of blue. What can you do with that? Or 14.
Mm-hmm.
That has absolutely no real meaning and no intrinsic value without context. Context might be, in the simplest form, the previous value was 10. It has been blue and not changed for 15 minutes. That's a little bit of context, right? Now, I don't get that without history. So I need some type of archiving in order to be able to get the most basic level of context, and that is something like a trend over time. And I know this is all very elementary. Everybody that's listening knows this, but what I do find is that a lot of times people don't stop maybe and think about that. But from a traditional historian, if you have a legacy historian product, you have a namespace, you have a tag path that is implied context. If you followed an ISA 95 model, you can tell me what blue is associated to, or 14.7 or whatever my example was, where it lives in the factory, what other tags or sensor representation you have around that, and you can derive context from that. Right? If you have history now, you can start to do a lot more with that. And that's actually, other than adding to that timestamps and quality scores, maybe engineering units, that's been about all of the context that most operations have worked with their data, if we think about data on an edge perspective. Specifically time series data, I should say that, specifically time series data. We fast forward to where we are today, and everybody is wanting to move fast and apply these incredibly powerful, we think, incredibly powerful tools, AI, right? I say we think just because, we haven't seen it proven in a really large scale yet, but we think they'll be really powerful. And what's the number one thing that those tools or any other tooling needs? Context. To be successful? It needs context. So that's the big problem, right? How do I go from where many of you who are listening to this are either saying, well, geez, it must be nice to just even have a legacy historian, or those that have a legacy historian saying, yeah, but 86,400 values from yesterday are great, except I need to slice and dice this by 5 or 6 different types of events or different pieces of context. How do we get you from where you are right now to being prepared with a strong foundation so that you can do something of real value here?
Jeff, what are the most common bottlenecks? I know you sort of touched on a few of them there, but
Yeah.
like if someone's not collecting their historical data, generally, what are the top 3 reasons why? Like, either they don't have one, are they running out of disk space, they don't know what to store? In your experience, what are the most common reasons they're not storing that history?
Yeah. The answer I would have told you 6 months ago was either a knowledge that they needed to, like not a knowledge from the front line, but a corporate initiative that they needed to, or that the existing solution that had been selected was expensive. They were out of license, so they had to prioritize something. And maybe the third reason would have been, hey, we've got a license. That's not the problem. We know we need to, but the technology that we have available to us just frankly isn't good enough to add any more to it. If we add something else, this thing's already touchy and crashes every 5 hours anyway. I don't want to make it worse. In the last 6 months, the we don't know we need to is completely gone away for most organizations. I'm going to paint with a wide brush in this conversation. Now what I run into is this enterprise level architecture debate around, we know we need to, where's the archive going to live? Should we be consolidating the 86 different systems that we have? Do we need data at plant? Do we bring it all home? If we bring it all to enterprise, what do we store it in? And I got to be honest, guys, it's an absolute dumpster fire conversation every time I'm in one.
I've had 3 of those conversations in the last 3 weeks with 3 different Fortune 500s, all doing the same thing. And in all 3 of those conversations, that has actually ended up being the exact same story, where they, a year ago, 2 years ago, or even 6 months ago, put in a big cloud-based analytics platform for 300 sites, piped all the data in there, went through all the effort. They put in various connectivity platforms on the sites, utilized what was already there. Some sites got left behind because there was nothing there. And they piped everything right into that analytics platform. And then 3 different enterprise enterprises, very large companies, had the exact same problem where the data scientists and that analytics platform underperformed because they were piping in raw PLC tags, raw HMI tags with different naming conventions. Some had context, some didn't. Some didn't even know. I mean, some were like chiller PLC temperature with no unit of measurement or no concept of where it was in the plant. And they couldn't make any use of that data. So even though they went through and they knew they needed it, then it's these debates you're talking about here of how do we do it. And everybody that I've seen recently is either they don't know they need to do it yet still, or they went straight to phase 3 and skipped that foundation layer, or they're still arguing about it, in my experience. And they're very fun conversations.
And these are all really capable, smart individuals. It's not,
Very.
this isn't, and I know it's not your heart. You're not pointing fingers. It's just that there's not enough exposure of
Right.
other solutions that work, right? They, you know, especially someone who's come through the ranks, right? Like they know plant life very, very well. They've been in this org for 15 years, or they've come from an org recently they were at for 10 years. And so they've seen 3 or 4 architectures, but they haven't seen 3,000 architectures. They haven't seen 100 systems that work compared to 500 systems that failed. And that's, I think, part of the big trying to figure it out now. So everybody wants to avoid the failure,
Right.
and they're trying to do this in one fell swoop, and it's questionable.
Very capable people, but very few people in an organization, especially once you get the bureaucracy and the silos, understand the full context of the needs.
Yeah.
So they might put in a very capable platform with a very capable team for a very capable reason, but that doesn't mean it's going to solve the things over here or it's going to solve the things over there. And talking about context and data a little bit further out of there, you've got the context of the business, the context of the people, the rest of that context as well. And everything we're talking about data is what goes up further. So even capable platforms or capable teams can make what in hindsight look like foolish decisions, but in the moment made perfect sense for the context they were operating under.
That's
I think that's a good analogy to getting back to the data as well.
That's right. It's just a comment and to come back then. The question that I can ask almost every single time in one of these calls, and that will almost guarantee just quiet on the other end, is can you describe for me your different persona groups that will be consumers of the data that you are focused right now on collecting, storing, modeling, and distributing?
Yep.
And
Say that again. Say that again.
yeah, to an enterprise architect, to a data architect, to anyone trying to solve this problem right now, I humbly would request, please pause and do a workshop and build out a list of all of the different personas inside of your organization that are going to be data consumers. Where do they live in the organization? What is their skill set? What is their needs of the data? What do those models need to look like for them? What are they coming to the thing you're building? What expectations are they coming with? Because while that doesn't completely inform the decision, if we're not building for them, who are we building for? And that's a question that when I ask, there's typically no answer. No one has done that work yet. On a marketing side of it, Zach, would you ever run a marketing campaign without knowing the persona that you're trying to land the campaign to?
I mean, you might be wrong. You might be asking the wrong person this question, but I hear your message is well received.
Yeah. Who's your audience? But anyway, on the and so that I said that goes back to the data context, because how much context can you add to the data? Well, you can add almost infinite context to data, and the question is, what context is going to add value? Where should I spend my time? And if I don't know who my personas are,
And that ties also into like where the data is being consumed, because often who the person is it a plant level person? Is it an enterprise
Right.
business analyst? The thing to look out for when you're selecting like historical data to provide context is like you don't want to like a kind of a monolithic solution that really, is kind of once you like, let's say you have a plant level historian, and then you're kind of like stuck at the plant level. You want it to be able to be flexible, to be able to provide data to multiple areas. We talk about like the microservice architecture, to be able to split where you're collecting and storing the data, so then you can format it in the format, whether that's frequency of collection of data, what other data sources are being stored in that data set. So being able to have a historian that doesn't paint you into a corner is, I think, really key to be able to serve those needs of those consumers.
Yeah, agreed. But that, and the reality is that's just a fraction of the architecture. The historian, the time series data is just a small piece of this.
Yeah, and
A very small piece, actually.
yeah, I think that leads really well into the foundation piece too, because what the context really means, historical data, the small slice, but that foundation is what context do we need? Where do we need it from? Why do we need it? Who needed it? Why did they need it? And that's how you can start to finalize that form of what do we need for a foundation based on who needs it and why did they need it.
Yeah.
And without that soft foundation, before we even start talking about the technical foundation or the architecture, that's going to get to the third step of where things break in another failure mode. But
Yeah.
I think all of this informs that foundation more than anything.
Where does the strategy that is we store all data everywhere as frequently as possible, where does that strategy fail?
Well, I mean, if it fails at the execution, and it fails because of the overhead.
Or
But
cost,
as
maybe, or
yeah, whatever that looks like, right? But cost is a result of the architecture. So if my strategy is, hey, we're a snowflake shop and every single raw data point from our entire organization goes into Snowflake, I haven't failed yet, right? I'm persisting. I'm bringing it all home. Where I fail is when I get a bill because every time I query that database and I do any type of calculation, which is basically any type of query, right? Now working with that data has become, well, where's the ROI, right? I have to have a really strong use case to start to work there. I also run into a failure of the talent level required in order to work within Snowflake, right? Can my average plant man or woman, low-level junior engineer or 10-year operator, do they know how to go access that? Can they build there? So I would not push back at all on a strategy of we want to store everything. The question becomes then, what does that look like? How do I execute that? Right.
Yeah.
Right. If someone then would say where, again, I'm gonna play a little bit of a, well, let's think this through. Let's try to play, let's see what success looks like. And based on the success that we want to have, where will we wish that we had it stored? Okay.
Yes.
So let's assume that I'm in the plant. We're a 10 plant organization. I don't have a standardized historian. I've got a home built MES, and I've got a bunch of other just systems for inventory quality, some business systems. I'm going to probably pretty quickly identify that if I want to decrease my scrap rate, if I want to ensure that I don't have to rework an entire lot due to a quality issue, well, then I need to make sure that my engineers and my automation professionals have complete access to data in near real time, right? So that's going to probably inform a decision that says my historian needs to be at site. The next question is, how long do I actually have to keep that data at site to serve that population? Not regulation, but to serve my persona. And that's probably pretty short as far as the 90% of their workflow, right? It depends on how long my process is, I suppose. If we have a process that's 3.5 months to completion in like an aerospace, then longer. But if we run 10,000 bottles in in 45 seconds and we do 500,000 bottle lots, I probably don't need to keep it nearly as long at site. So I need a way to also probably, I'm going to say, hey, my site personnel are really focused on site things. I need to serve them that way. But I've got this data science team at Enterprise who is looking to find ways to empower the site team through new algorithms and new AI and ML best practices, yada, yada, yada. They're going to need this data also. So I'm probably going to replicate that data. I'm probably going to store it at site for 3 to 6 months. I'm going to create a duplicate stream. I'm going to push it through whatever delivery technology I want to use. I don't care, but I'm going to arrive at an ultimate enterprise archive, and I'm probably going to send it all through. I probably am. I don't know what I don't know yet, so I'm probably going to send it all through. But if I'm really successful at enterprise and I create this new finding that's going to affect the way I run my site, where's that model going to ultimately live? I'm going to push it right back down to site, right? So yeah, that's exactly right. So my enterprise is more of my R&D, my regulatory storage, my larger data strategy. But I know that things are ultimately going to come back to site if they're production related, right? That's where they're going to try to live. So in order to keep this ecosystem moving and just have stacks of innovation on top of innovation, then I need to figure out a way that my site-based team and my enterprise team are collaborating. That means I need to make sure that my enterprise team understands what my site team knows about the data, knows about the process. So the only way that works, at least in my mind, is to change the workflow that already is happening at the site.
Yeah.
So that
what does that look like? What do you mean?
Sure. Zach, you're a quality engineer.
Right.
Okay. You were off for 2 days. You came back in, and you're looking at we're a can manufacturer, and you're looking at the thickness of the sidewall of the can spec, and you've got 100,000 cans that are getting ready to get scrapped, and you're told to figure out why, so that we don't do this again. How many systems might you need to hit? You're going to pull data from some PV historian.
Yeah.
You're going to want to understand and doing that, you think you identify a part of the process where this happened. You're going to want to understand, is it a maintenance issue? You're going to hit a maintenance system. Have there been any work orders? Has anybody touched this equipment? You're going to understand if there been has any of the control changed on this? Have any of my raw material suppliers changed? Do I have a defect in this metal? Is it a different vendor all of a sudden? I just named 5 systems. And how are you going to do all that work? Well, traditionally, you're going to go query a bunch of databases. You're going to bring all of that data back into the engineer's favorite database application, Excel. You're going to spend some time trying to clean it up, make it work, align it. And you're going to find you're going to find a hypothesis, and you're going to go prove it, and you'll know yes or no, this is the cause, right? The problem happens is that 3 months from now, same problem. Can sidewall thickness issue and quality. You've been promoted. You're such a stud. You're no longer there. The next quality engineer comes, and guess what they're going to do? They're going to repeat all of the work that you've done. They're not going to know that you'd already kind of built a model. Excel's not a great place to collaborate. All of your work was one-off, temporary, right? You had to manually extract the data and formulate it. You've lost all of that. It's not. No one knows you did it. No one knows how you did it. No one knows where the work lives. It's not governable at all.
Would this be a model that I would kind of store in the UAF, if you will?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, we'll get to that, I think. Yeah. But just from a fundamental problem, right? So the question was, how do I get those teams to collaborate? Well, it starts by making sure that the work that your front line is doing is visible. And that means a tool that's a culture change, but it's also a technology change. It's got to be a technology that will share what they've done as part of the data stream. So that when I'm looking at a data point in my lakehouse, I understand how my engineer got there. I can reverse engineer their process before I ring them up. I already have an understanding. I still need to talk to them, but at least I have an understanding of how they got there and what's included and how they did it. That's what's not happening. We're selecting tools at enterprise that site engineers can't use. Site engineers have legacy tools that enterprise can't even access. That's the problem that we see over and over with data context.
Yeah.
This is one of the core premises and principles of the unified namespace, right? Like, treat all data consumers and producers as nodes in an ecosystem. If you consume from data, you create new information, you publish that data back into a unified namespace, if you will.
Yeah.
But yeah, I am interested to like hear a little more, if we could get into the UAF later, because I'm
Yeah,
I'm trying to understand how these concepts layer and build upon each other in a way
Yeah.
that a manufacturer can actually understand it and like go implement.
And I think the spirit of a unified namespace is definitely that. But
Right.
just like any other implementation of any architecture or any ideas, the ways a UNS can be implemented vary widely. And well, I think the spirit and the intent of a unified namespace is very much to level the playing field and treat everybody as equal nodes and bring that up. There's the two components, just like Jeff's already been talking about there's the technical side and the culture side. So if the technical nodes don't meet the requirements for the UNS and we move forward anyway, that's already a point of failure where we could be missing context. But even more importantly, in my opinion, is if the human and the culture nodes don't align in a way that they know to share that context with people. So when everybody's operating as equal nodes in a system, but they don't understand who the other personas are, because in a traditional stack, you might have a product manager who's doing all of the stuff, learning your personas, passing those down to the team. Your project manager is going to be managing the milestones and the technical implementations, and the product manager is really keeping track of those personas. But when you flatten that and treat everybody, and everybody is now part of this UNS, publishing to everybody else, everybody needs to know at least some subset of those other personas. And that's where that culture change is really critical. And empathy becomes way more important than the technical implementation to meet the true spirit, how I understand it, of the UNS. And so, more often than not, that's not the case. So, when you walk into a plant that has implemented a UNS, which could mean one of 100 things to different people,
That's right.
a lot of times you're going to walk into a place that has an MQTT broker set up, and they're going to be publishing some topics to that. And you might have enterprise site area, maybe they've got a tank and a temperature, but that temperature is 42. Is that Celsius? Is it Fahrenheit? Do I know what process it's running? Is it going to be heating? Is it going to be cooling? Is 42 hot or cold or neutral? What's that mean? We don't know that yet because somebody published 42, and that might be going to historian. And we might even have the context of enterprise site area, and there's a tank. And we could, as humans, presume that that tank should be hot or cold based on our understanding of that process. But somebody else looking at that might not know that the tank room on the receiving side is going to be room temperature, or maybe in a different process is chilled or heated. Not everybody's going to have that context as the human looking at it to understand that. And so if we're not publishing that other stuff, like what is the units of measurement? What's the intent? What's the required versus the actual? What else is going on? Because we're assuming that everybody else has the context we have when we publish that message. And not everybody has the same context as everybody else based on their own personal experiences, what their skill sets are, and where they are in the business. And so I think that's where the UNS and context commonly falls apart in my experience. And I think that's a good place where the framework can help, the analytics framework, and Flow software is one of the tools, and things like that can really help to combine disparate data sources, one of which could be a UNS, another one could be a historian, could be a full legacy brownfield site, or the most modern platform in the world. But if you don't have something to unify the data, not just the integration, that's where.
Let me ask you this. Then what's the best way to take, because unified namespace is current state, doesn't necessarily have historical data built in, although it can be the source of your historical data, like with an MQTT collector. What's the best way, if you were to create the spec or write it right now, what's the best way to make historical data easily accessible to UNS consumers or UNS people who are browsing a unified namespace? I've seen some of the stuff that you guys have done at Flow Software, and I do like it, but Dylan, how would you do it?
I'm going to answer, I've got two different answers, and I'm going to pass it to Jeff here to talk more about it. The first answer is the best answer for it depends on who it's for. So if we haven't answered the persona, there is no best answer. And before I get into the more technical answer, I know a lot of people get frustrated when on things like this, we start talking about, well, the answer depends, it depends, it depends. And the reason for that is usually because we don't know the persona you're talking to. We don't know your context. So anything we say could be the best answer, or it could be a terrible answer because we don't know the context you're living in. But generally speaking, more often than not, when I walk onto a site with or without a UNS, and they have a historian or no historian or 12 historians,
you wouldn't even know they existed.
Right. So if I don't know what they have, it's hard to give them any answer, but we'll assume they already have a historian for part of the site. They're missing a historian for another part of their site. And maybe they've got a different historian for their building management systems and stuff. So like they've got all of the building automation pieces are in this historian over here. Half the process is in historian over here, but half of it's not historized at all. And that's usually the answer to that is going to be Flow software, in my opinion. With Timebase as the missing piece of the historian on that other piece. But I'll pass that to Jeff now. And
yeah, I want to start by saying I'm not personally convinced that using the UNS as my time series historian logger makes sense just yet.
Yep.
I would subscribe that there are always going to be multiple functional namespaces inside of an enterprise. I don't believe that any organization will build a single unified namespace that will serve the purpose of the entire organization.
Agreed.
Over time, your organization will grow, you'll acquire, you'll merge, you'll want to integrate with vendors. You'll want to share data outside of your four walls. So even if you get your UNS dialed in, there's always going to be a level of abstraction somewhere with growth. And that's a good thing. That's a great problem to have. So that makes me work it backwards and say, I need to be okay with multiple namespaces. When I give myself permission to do that, I start asking a lot of different questions. I start to think, again, persona-based, when my maintenance group is running analytics, how do they actually want data structured? Do they care about a in-depth ISA 95 type of a model, or do they want top-level rotating equipment over 20 horsepower? Do they want a very flat model that's reorganized? The next kind of point, let's talk about history. So based on that, there's a pretty significant issue with historians, and that is that almost every historian is going to create a historical archive by a tag, and that tag is going to be based on its name, which includes all of the structure. So the hierarchy of the tag name equals historical record. Whatever I am historizing from needs to never change. I can't iterate that hierarchy. If I do, I'm gonna split my history across another tag. right? If I'm historizing Acme, Austin plant, packaging line one, pressure.pv, and tomorrow line one gets expressed line 001. Tomorrow I've got a new tag, and I don't have joined history. So to historize off of something like a UNS, an MQTT broker, is
Breaking
to,
your architecture, kind of.
you are saying we are never going to iterate this model. And if we iterate this model, I am going to have to go rework a lot of historical databases. And that typically is not easy with most vendors. So I like the idea personally of historizing as close to the edge as possible and persisting there, not being based on the name transformation, because typically in brownfield, you're abstracting some legacy equipment to get that published to an MQTT broker. You're not going straight from equipment to MQTT broker in most brownfield operations. In your greenfield, you're selecting technology to do that. But I'm still going to historize as close to the edge as possible. And then I'm going to make a very conscious decision on, specifically on time series data, do I send everything to the broker? Why would I send everything to the broker?
And who for?
Yeah, right. If I send everything to the broker, you might say, well, Jeff, you need to, because I need to get that into the enterprise data lake. Okay, fair enough. So maybe that's an argument for turning around and like Canary's MQTT publisher, right? Everything that comes in goes out, right? And within that historian platform, I can reshape the data and abstract the name from stored name to published name. Fair enough. I could publish it 3 different times under three different names. It's a really powerful feature if I'm trying to use that as my mechanism for pushing data forward. But I probably wouldn't do that. I'd probably go back to the edge and I'd probably dual log. I'd log to Canary and I'd push through some type of a data ops tool, like a high byte. I'd push maybe to a broker if that data point adds value somewhere. I don't have to send it because it's stored. I can always get it later if I needed to.
And we conveniently, the other side too, Zach, and for people watching, the technical side of the UNS, when we're talking MQTT specifically, is if we're historizing off of a broker, that doesn't mean we're going to get that message. So if I publish a topic to a broker, I can guarantee that the broker gets that topic. That's all baked into the standard. But there is no way for me to guarantee that I published it and a certain subscriber got it. So there's a high risk of losing data and dropping windows too with a broker that you don't have from some other more deterministic options that exist local and closer to the.
I think what you're saying is very important. I had like a light bulb moment. So like what you're saying is storing the data as close to the edge as possible. So maybe even just like from an OPC broker or some OPC server.
The way we've done it for 30 years.
Yep.
Right.
And then 30 years ago, you could have taken Kepware to, or some OPC broker from the PLC and device drivers, hook it up to your historian, and away you go. Today, you take Ignition, hook it up to your device drivers, and drop to your historian. It's still OPC.
Yep.
It's all the same, different faces, different names, different companies, different licensing models, and there's pros and cons, and everything's changed, but it's still the same.
But if you're sort of separating or deciding between what do I publish real-time current state at just theoretically the most highest resolution speed versus, well, if the temperature's changing 10 times a second, does every other system need to trigger an event off of that? Probably not. So you could store that more locally to a time series data historian and then serve that up when a consumer needs it.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
and then you could do that with the API or something.
That's right, because your app, what are consumers? They're people, they're applications, they're archives. Okay. Mm-hmm. If I take archive out of that list and it's people and applications, again, what value do they get from last known value? In order to get value from the data at the broker, they have to store it. So if they're going to store it, in order to create a record so they can interpret the data,
Mhm.
why wouldn't they just get the data from where it's already stored?
Yeah.
Mhm.
This plays
Uh,
right into context engineering for AI, right? AI agents, like you
Yeah,
have to be
yeah,
selective of what you feed them.
yeah,
Like,
that's
are you
right.
going to feed them all of everything at
Yeah,
infinite resolution? Like, you can't, you know?
mm-mm.
that's right.
And same thing with people.
So let's come back to this, you know, with this kind of a thought. Now, let me also just again for the audience say that there's tons of operations where the edge, there's not that many people. The people that are there don't have any real need for the data, or you just say, wow, yeah, but look, my connectivity is so good from plant to fair enough. We just, yeah,
Mhm.
okay. Then your edge looks different. You know, your source, your edge looks different. This is not a one size fits all approach. It's just the questions to ask. But
In that scenario, real quick, would you bias towards storing the data where it's produced or storing it where it needs to be consumed?
in the where it's meaning the scenario where it's not going to be used local.
Yeah, let's say like you're running almost like a lights out operation and
Yeah.
you're wanting to store the data. It's going to be produced from the facility, but you're more likely going to be consumed in the cloud. Is it better to store up into the cloud so where it's consumed, or from the cloud reach down and grab data from where it's stored?
Yeah. So if I have store and forward technology in place where I can buffer data for network outages and I've got enough buffer, right? It's not memory, it's
You're going
buffer
to do
to
both.
disk. I'm going to buffer to disk on store and forward and just stream into the cloud. I'm not going to try to create I'm not going to try to create a double historian architecture if the local historian's never going to get used. But I am going to make sure that my data collection has
Got it.
store and forward with buffering, not to memory, buffering to
Mhm.
disk. Okay. Buffering to disk is important, right? Power cycle, and you've just lost what could have been, especially a facility you're not checking in on that much. You might have been buffering for 14 days, not realized it, power cycled, and lost everything, even though you had the memory for it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But this kind of brings us then, I think, to the conversation around, okay, so what actually is a UNS?
Mhm.
And what is the responsibility when it comes to operational data for coming into the UNS, and how do I enable AI and other advanced data consumers long term? I think we have a very shallow, as a general populace right now, we have a very shallow understanding of what the UNS is.
Mhm.
I believe that the UNS is not an MQTT broker. The technology doesn't, the current technology doesn't satisfy what I think the four requirements of the UNS have to be.
Mhm.
I as a application, as an AI agent, need to be able to query the UNS to understand what are all of the object types that have been modeled
Mhm.
and what do those type, how are those types built? What are they comprised of? What are the variables that are available to me so that I know how to structure my application? And I need to be able to do that without seeing data in motion.
Mhm.
So it can't, I can't only know about an object exist if it comes across the broker while I'm looking at it.
So you need additional technology in order to support.
First off,
Yeah.
yep.
Right.
I need a true object definition of all objects known inside my
Yes.
organization. Second thing I have to know is I need to understand the relationship of those objects to one another, not
Mhm.
just now, but over time. So I need a history of how those objects have been linked. So this is really where your knowledge graphing technology comes in,
Mhm.
right? So definition of my objects, how they're built, what they're, what they are, how they are related to one another, how they have had those relationships over time. And then, and only then, do I care about last state.
Mhm.
Because now I make a decision on here's the things I care about based on what I am trying to do. I know how these things interact with other things. Now I have been able to build a list that I would like to subscribe to
Mm-hmm.
and know the current state or the last known state.
And I mean, on top of that, how many use cases are there where current state is all you want?
Yeah.
Whether you're a human or the AI. I mean, if anybody
Starting point.
anyone who's been playing with the sorry, keep going.
No, I've got one use case for sure.
Oh, yeah.
The only current state KPI I care about
Uh-huh.
is my wife happy with me? If
Yeah.
I could subscribe to that, that's all I
would be
care.
good.
We had a good question come in, probably for Jeff and Dylan.
Can I pause real quick, Zach? And I just want to
Yeah.
hit my fourth point, and then I'm right
Okay.
there. Okay. So my fourth point then for the UNS. All right. So all objects without seeing data move. The relationship of those objects to one another. I build a list on what I want to subscribe to. Fourth thing I have to be able to do is I have to be able to know how to query the history of those objects, and not just the history of values, right? Not just PVs. I don't just want pressure. I want to understand configuration history. I want to understand object iterations. This is version 13 of pump. What did version 11 look like? I want to be able to ask for history only when pump was being serviced by technician ID 1356 for 30 minutes before the service and 30 minutes after the service, so I can build a model around what type of production did we see after a service. So those are the four things that I actually need to be able to ask the UNS for. Right now, I can only ask the UNS for one of those, and that's essentially last known value. And so that tells me that I need a broader plan if I'm going to, because no one will disagree with that's what an application wants. That's what AI wants. That's what a reporting tool needs. So the disagreement comes with how do I build that and put a box around that and call that my UNS, and that's where the UAF.
Well, some would say that's not the role of the UNS, and it's left up to the developer. But after working on it for like almost 10 years, it's like, are we any closer to having some form of a standard? Like as far as how these things are being done, either in the UNS, on top of, next to,
I don't understand how that's not the role of the UNS.
Well, I might go a step further and ask you, Zach, too, being where you've been and what you've seen. The two use cases, so talk about the role of it and the theory of it aside, the two use cases that I most commonly see a UNS used for are either a message broker between dashboards. So it's basically distributed dashboards separated from your backend, so you can have different ways of visualizing the current state. Or the more common one I see more than anything is things in the field publishing to a broker and being stored in some form of historian or time series database for some analytics purpose. Whether that database is inside of a product, inside of a cloud suite, or somewhere else, almost everything I see a UNS for ends in a historian, and then somebody queries that historian. Whether it's a historian as we know it, or if it's a time series database, but it's history.
The very first UNS was only current state, right? It was as the lore goes, the very first UNS was DDE, connecting to a Rockwell PLC, Microsoft DDE into an Excel.
Kepware to DDE to Microsoft Excel to create a real-time current state dashboard. Use case number one of the two.
Right. So I agree that you're still going to want use case 2, 3, and 4, where I guess my interpretation of what UNS, how it's been, proselytized, it was always excluding the history, right? It got you to that. It solved that very first, very real problem that a lot of organizations struggled with. And the key to UNS is it did it in such a way that anyone could understand, and I think that's why it stuck, and that's why it kind of became popularized. But yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting point. I mean, because, I was always like, all right, well, obviously you're going to have an object model in a database. when I built the UNS for the very large oil and gas SCADA system, that's what I started with. It was really like a UNS management utility, which was stored in a database, and that drove the configuration of our namespace, right? So it was always UNS plus, plus more, right? But you know,
And I would just say that's the UNS. I don't think it's plus more. I just think it's broadening the scope and definition
of what is
of
included with. Oh,
what a
that's a fair.
UNS is. Because
That's
everybody
fair.
just, yeah, because right, it's not an MQTT broker. Everybody's heard Walker say that 100 times. It's not an MQTT broker. It's not an MQTT broker. This is the thoughts, and I'm speaking for him, and I don't want to misspeak for him, but I have to think this is what he means when he says, and when he has said many, many times, it is not an MQTT broker. So it is a larger box that needs to have more to it. And so if we're building objects, AKA models, if we're mapping relationships, AKA models on top of a knowledge graph, and then I need to subscribe only to the things I care about, and I need to be able to pull history of the things that I care about. All of a sudden, I'm realizing I don't need an MQTT broker at all to build a UNS. If I'm not subscribing to that many last known states, I could use WebSocket for that. I don't have to build a UNS with an MQTT broker. I don't have to build it with OPC servers. I can build it in a completely different way if I want. So I think, again, just coming back to, if we're focused on operations, which in manufacturing is where that's where we're driving value, is at the plant floor, then I need my operations teams to be able to build these models and combine data from multiple data sources in these models and add all of the context that they know about this process. That when I'm in a state 20, there's no way temperature can ever be more than 100. And in state 20, if temperature sensor reads 1450, nullify it or clamp it at 100 or replace it with the previous 5 minutes time weighted average, whatever that rule is. Like, I need that to happen based on my engineers reshaping that raw data into engineering process context. Then I need to create the events that I care about. Hey, I care about a fault. I care about a setup time. I care about a 5-minute window before a quality issue. I care about a shift. These are the events I care about. And then I choose how I want to bring all of this data from these different systems into an aggregation around those different periods. And so what are the building blocks that no plant has right now? Zach, Dylan, you guys have been in plants. We've got people on here. And when I say no plant, I mean, what do 99% of plants not have? I can't walk into any plant. I cannot remember a single plant I've ever visited where they have stored and readily available for their 200 key PVs all of the statistical analysis and breakdown of those PVs stored, ready to go. Hey, every 1 minute, average, min, max, range, delta, standard deviation, variance, count. Roll it up into 5 minutes, hours, shifts, week to dates, days. Like those are the building blocks of continuous improvement.
Is that because they don't have Flow software?
Well, how would you do it? What calculation?
I would use Flow software.
What calculation engine do you have that is built to do that? And
well, this is why I'm also an advocate of while pushing everything to the lowest common denominator or the highest common aggregated broker, like the capital UNS, even if it's not at the best resolution or you miss some packets, dropping a historian on that just to act as like some sort of a log, even though it's not going to be at the highest resolution, it's not going to be perfect, is still better than nothing.
Yeah, but it's not. But if I'm gonna build right, like I could build a garage next door out my window right now. But man, if I'm gonna do it, I should probably make sure that I'm building something that's going to last, right?
Well, and that's I think to your point, Zach. If I'm putting in Timebase
We're
and I'm
we gotta
putting
hit
in a
we
new
gotta hit this
project,
guy's
and
question
I'll
though.
get yeah, if I'm putting in Timebase and I'm putting in a new project and I'm building it to last, I mean, I could technically just put an ignition, throw a random historian in there, and write a bunch of scripts that are going to work for me. And my one project right now is my one integrator. But if I want that to work for the whole site, for the next site, for the site after, that's where I could put in ignition, keep everything I'm doing over here. But if I want it to scale and want it to last, now I can throw in Timebase and I can have a real historian and I can get everything really going. And then if I need those contexts, the buckets, the windows, and all of that, that's where Flow Software does it. And then when I extend it to the second site, the third site, the brownfield, I might not be doing a new project where I'm putting in ignition. Flow Software can still stay as that layer in the exact same way as it is on every other site.
This is honestly why I'm so excited about ProveIt, because we're gonna get to see how these different vendors have addressed some of these challenges. As the conference has grown, the number of vendors has increased. The footprint of the enterprises, the virtual factory has increased. We're having to develop new techniques in order to tackle these new challenges, and we're learning new things as we go. Like the SESME profiles, that was kind of a curveball that some of the vendors weren't prepared for, but they're trying to understand how they can adopt it or address it. But let's bring up the question here, because he said
the answer to the question there is, so I'll repeat the question for people who
I'm building out an ignition for our I'm building out ignition for our manufacturing site, and I plan to use Timebase from Flow. Can you give me a very high level of the information I should historize and what I shouldn't?
high level, I'm going to give more of a framework than a specific answer because we don't have the context to fully answer that, I don't believe. Start with, just like what Jeff was saying earlier in the call here, start with the persona, start with the use case, and then what data points do you need to solve that use case? And then from there, are there going to be any bottlenecks or any reasons not to store other data? What do you presume the next use cases will be? And get as much as feasible without slowing you down in the first phase here. We can add more later. Err on the side of too much and err on the side of well contextualized stuff. So if a tag is going to change and you know that, we can kind of figure it out and go from there. But start with the persona, the use case, the problem, and what data do you need to solve that problem. If you have a specific KPI, what are the prerequisites to that KPI? What are those calculations? And what do you need as the source data for that?
Are you going to be configuring, just real quick technical question, are you going to be configuring your collector to use wildcards so that way any new topics that show up will automatically be?
No, I'm going to use the module that we built
Mhm.
for ignition. So Timebase is going to appear as a historical data provider,
Yep.
storage provider, sorry, in your ignition list of historians, and you're just going to check historize on your tags inside of ignition. And it's going to show up. Dylan, I'd expand and say I'd go after more, just personally.
Yeah, I'd go over more than less for sure.
Just because it's easy to toss it out if it's so. The way that Timebase is structured, just for the ignition audience, is make sure that you've created ignition tag providers that represent your actual process or your geography, because we are going to create a separate data set for each of those ignition tag providers that we discover. You can then turn around and set data set purge timeframes inside of Timebase. So if there's an ignition tag provider that you don't think is going to add a ton of value and you're running out of space, you could always bring it down. But I don't think you're going to run out of space. I mean,
no, it's efficient.
And we'll sustain 150,000 changes a second. And we've now tested over 1 million tags in a single Timebase historian. So I think you'll find that to help you.
Yeah, and real quick, and we can see more about this at ProveIt, and it might be a different video we can do later too. A pattern I've been doing even before all of this in Ignition was make a new tag provider and then clean it up, have good UDTs. I can leave all the other stuff there, but make a new tag provider, have some standardized UDTs, make a nice structure, add that context at the tag provider level, and then historize that tag provider. And now with time-based, using that tag provider as that context to add that historian, it just enhances that even more. And then in those UDTs, typically what I'll do is I'll have a tag for value or things like that, and then use that for every value within that UDT that has things like units of measurement and things like that. And at the very least, I'll have every value, numeric, whatever we have, historized at the edge. Once we get further up the stack, that starts to change a little bit of how much, what do we, what don't we, becomes a bigger question. But, and all of that will be on display at ProveIt too in our booth. So
I've got a final question. All right, so if you guys don't know, you guys, when Jeff goes on stage, just make sure to have your camera out and ready to snap a QR code, because Jeff is the GOAT of sales and marketing, by the way, if you guys didn't know, and I would be remiss not to mention this, but he dropped an offer last year on stage at ProveIt that was so hot, people couldn't even access it. Like, it went that quickly. So when Jeff's on stage, or if he's giving a presentation, I'm just saying, have your camera ready to be able to snap up whatever Godfather offer he drops. I can't wait to see what it is, honestly.
So we ended up booking eight pilots last year at ProveIt in Dallas from stage, and that booked us out internally for the next 6 months, really. And then we booked another 4 at ICC. One of those has turned into a 15-site rollout, which has been awesome. We're going back to basics on stage next month. So, spoiler alert, we're going to historize with time-based historian. We are going to build the statistical building blocks that you wish you had at the plant for every PV you care about. We're going to turn around and publish those building blocks right back into the UNS. Most people don't know that Flow's Info Hub, it's what you call Flow software, it's what we call the Info Hub. The Info Hub acts as a archive of all of the KPIs and events that we calculate. We store those, but we also act as a orchestration layer, meaning you can use our API for us to fetch raw data from the historian, from the MES, from the connected systems. So as part of our ProveIt session, we are publishing back to the broker not just the last known value of the hourly standard dev, but we're also publishing an endpoint so that you can use our API to ask for history of that, or even the raw data itself. So we will be sending historical endpoints into the UNS so that an application or a consumer would then be able to know how to fetch that history without having to go hit the historian, without having to go hit the MES. That's the first part. Second part is then we're going to sit AI using our AI gateways. We're going to sit an AI agent on top of this and show what an AI agent can do when you have the basic building blocks of statistical analysis already pre-configured, pre-calculated, and stored. And that's our session. It's not some crazy, oh my gosh, how did they ever do this? It's just the fact that nobody's done it because they don't have a calculation engine and a modeling tool that would be easy to do this and then publish it back to a broker.
That's the making it practical session in 30 seconds there. It is.
And now there's no more excuse in 2026. If you're a manufacturer, come to ProveIt. Flow, what's the Flow software code? Just Flow, or is it Flow software?
Flow. Yep.
Use code FLOW, save 25% off.
50%. 50%. If you're
a manufacturer, you could save 50% off.
That's right.
Make sure you tell them that Flow sent you. Thank you, Jeff, for coming on our podcast. Dylan, you want to close it out?
Yeah, I guess thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Zach. Always good to have a podcast here. Couple comments left in the chat for what is a UNS and all that. I think that's a video of its own right for later. That could be a whole rabbit hole. But yeah, I think this is a good conversation. Very practical, very easy ways to get started, and something that feels like it might not be so easy. And yeah, it's just practical. There's an easy path forward. Flow Software, Info Hub, any other vendors you see at ProveIt, it's going to be a great place to go and see all of these things live and see how they work together. Our demo very specifically is bringing in little bits of basically everybody and seeing how everything integrates together and how it works together. And then all the other vendors are going to be there doing their thing, really showing all the true art of the possible of what their tools do. So encourage you to come to our booth and see how everything works together, and then venture off and go to the individual software booths and get the real deep demo of each individual piece. Flow Software is always one of the highlights of every event that they're speaking at. So definitely make a point to go there. If I remember correctly, you're on Thursday morning just before us, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So Tuesday, I think we're going to shoot for a really good, solid, practical application of AI workshop on Tuesday.
Ooh, nice.
Tuesday night, we're sponsoring the dumpster fire sessions. So come with your, be prepared for your worst. And I've heard yours, I think, Dylan. I think you've got I think you've got a champion in the making. But we've got trophies and awards for the worst dumpster fire stories Tuesday night. Wednesday, we are sponsoring the Medieval Times. So make sure you mark your calendars for Wednesday night for Medieval Times. And then we are with Sesame Thursday morning, looking at we've incorporated their API within Timebase. And then our session is Thursday at 11:30. And buddy, I'm going to be asleep by 2 o'clock Thursday afternoon. It's going to be a very busy week.
Yes. Yeah.
But just a tease. I will do a little teaser. You will not miss our booth inside of the exhibit hall. You will not have a hard time finding us, I promise.
Good to hear.
Thank you, the audience, for joining us. And make sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment below. And we'll see you guys at ProveIt. Thank you.